We'll share out the link to you in the Meetup app, where you can come and view that at your pleasure. A big thank you to everyone's joined, whether you're a first timer here or you've been here before. Thank you for coming along. To introduce myself, I'm Chris Waldron. I'm a senior UX designer at IWF. I put up my hand a little while ago to help out Clodagh, who actually is the organizer of this event, helping her out. And tonight we've got a panel of 2 people who are going to be listening to. And the format of this evening will be that we have got Fabrizio and we have got Janet, Stephanie. They're going to each talk to us for about 20 to 30 minutes. And after that, after each session from each of those 2, we'll run a session of questions and answers to each person for about 10 minutes after each talk. And Clodagh has put in the chat a link where you can type your question, and we'll come to them at the end of that. Because of the number of attendees tonight, we've automatically muted you, but you're welcome to turn your cameras on if you like. Please, as I said, ask your questions through the link that's in the chat there. And don't be shy. Please ask questions. We're here to learn and get knowledge from those that we're going to hear talking to us. And as an introduction, I'd like to introduce you to Fabrizio. Fab, sorry, I can't pronounce your surname. I won't try. I don't want to bastardize it. But Fabrizio's got 6 years of experience as a human-centered designer, and a bit more than that. His focus is on the intersection of customer research and omnichannel customer experience and value proposition design. And he loves helping companies better understand their customers and design profitable products and services that people crave. So he's living the dream of UX like we all are, I hope. He's currently focusing on freelance clients, and he's mentoring at Techstars. He loves designing health experiences as head of design at SiSU Health Group. Previously, he worked with companies such as Nissan, Rolls-Royce, Unilever, Deloitte, Telstra, and NAB across many places, including Japan, UK, and Indonesia. And tonight, he's going to talk to us about some lessons he learned and an approach to a freemium model in health. SiSU Health is a health tech startup with a mission to help people help people live healthier lives through objective health data. So Fab, I'll invite you to the floor and let's listen to see what Fab's got to tell us.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris and Clodagh. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. Let's get into it. So today I'll be speaking about a lean startup approach to premium, again, working in the health sector. So what we'll cover today will be a quick introduction to SiSU Health Group. I'll kind of talk about the motivation behind premium, and then I'll kind of highlight the approach that we took, a very iterative approach, and I'll kind of walk through iteration 1, 2, 3, 4, where we currently are, and then kind of talk into the future state around iteration number 5, what the next step is, and then just touch on other considerations, a few lessons learned, and then I'll open the floor to questions. I'd say, does that sound good to everyone? But we're in a digital format, you can't really reply, so I'll assume yes. Okay, so SiSU Health Group. Who is SiSU Health Group and where do we play? So we were founded actually back in 2013 by Dr. Noel Duncan, and we're founded in Melbourne. We currently have 31 employees. We have offices both in London and in Hawthorne, part of the Melbourne University campus, international campus, if anyone knows it. And late last year, we raised our Series A funding. So as Chris did mention before, we're on a mission to help people live healthier lives by providing effective evidence-based tools, program services to measure and improve your health. So what does that actually mean and how are we helping people live healthier lives? So predominantly, we have these health stations. We've got 2 versions, a sort of large, it's now come to known as the Maxi internally, and then we've got a miniature version of that. Now they're class 2A medical devices and they have the ISO standards and certifications. And these stations are predominantly placed throughout Australia and UK, Germany even, Ireland, in pharmacies, in a few retail settings, as well as a lot of corporates as well. So you may have come across them before. These stations enable people to have objective data, height, weight. From that, you can calculate BMI, blood pressure, resting heart rate, body fat percentage, diabetes risk, among a few other things. Now, to tie in that sort of physical space and that physical touch point, we also provide a sort of health dashboard, online health dashboard, where you can kind of measure, track, and progress your health over time, as well as see healthy ranges, have recommendations on what you can improve and what you should work on, and offering other health risk appraisals, such as our HRI, which is, in short, a questionnaire. We also provide personalized programs and support around planners and programs to help people improve. And then recently, very recently actually, yesterday, soft launch, prescription telehealth service. So just some key stats talking about the stations. So we've just ticked over 3.6 million health checks in Australia and, well, around the world, I guess, Australia, UK, Germany, Ireland. We have around 1.2 million customers, 450 stations distributed throughout the world, an NPS of 63. And some smoking reduction, a few other things here. Something I'm quite proud of as well is that basically the use of the stations, it's been scientifically validated and peer reviewed that if someone uses the station on a regular basis, they're more likely to see positive health outcomes. So I'll just touch on SiSU from a design/customer perspective. So we're a small team, but a close-knit team. So Chris sort of already gave the introduction to myself. And then we have 3 superstars working with us. So Natalie, she's a strategic designer. She helps quite a lot in this project. She's been full-time on it actually since it started. And then Kai, she's a product designer. She's been in and out of the generative research phase, which I'll touch on shortly. And Thais as well, part of the team too. I'd say put your hand up and if you're here, but again, digital. I always think it's also nice to kind of see what different teams are using in a sort of design tool related fashion. So massive fan of Figma. Used to be a massive fan of Miro until FigJam came out recently. Now I'm a massive fan of FigJam and less so Miro. But in terms of surveys, we predominantly use SurveyMonkey, Zeppelin to do all the handover to dev, Klaviyo managing our comms. If we do need a video whipped up quickly, we'll actually use Canva, and then Airtable, a few things in between. So just a disclaimer before we get into this presentation. Given the sensitive nature and the situation we're in at the moment, I've removed all the pricing, costs, and detailed personas and insights. I've left a few, but not too much, just because it's not ready to go public yet. And I will also be discussing more than just designs. I know this is design-focused meetup, but I did want to touch on kind of the end-to-end holistic process, considering things such viability and feasibility as well. And then I'll play more of an emphasis on the design throughout the stages. Cool, so why premium? Why as a business? Our strategy is predominantly broken into 2 sections. One is kind of to grow a thriving business, and the second aspect of that is to help people live a healthier life. So just looking at the perspective of why we actually decided to create a premium offering, freemium in this case, we wanted to pivot away from pure B2B lease revenue stream without putting a price on our core health checks. So as mentioned before, our end user core health checks are free, and we are actively supporting Australians and people from Germany, Germans, I guess, from the UK, etc., to live a healthier life. So we do want to keep those core health checks free, enable people to know their blood pressure and make educated decisions. And as you can imagine, during COVID, the corporate space would have taken a bit of a hit, especially for a hardware type machine. It also, this premium service impacts our core product, which involves each team and encourages collaboration. There's also less dependencies on partners, meaning we can move quickly. It's kind of in our own hands. And it helps us scale so we can have a bigger impact on the world's population, again, by making health data accessible. So just at a high level of approach, again, I mentioned leveraging a few things from lean startup, a few human-led, human-centered design-led approaches, and a few little hacks in between. So what we basically were tasked with, or in a situation, is that we wanted to do the minimum amount of work possible to maximize learnings before committing build resources. We're sort of in the situation where we didn't have the luxury to put devs on, even if it was ready to go at the moment. We have a heavy dev resource constraint. So we kind of said, okay, what is the maximum amount of learning we can do through prototyping, through quant, through qual, etc. On top of that, we're also dealing with lots of ambiguity and many unknowns. We've never launched a premium service or a paid service throughout SiSU. In fact, we've never had a direct-to-consumer revenue stream before. And we really focused on an iterative approach with specific stage gates. Again, back to the lean startup, do we pivot or do we persevere? and set those boundaries, as well as placing small bets to learn from these before making a big bet. And of course, from good product management, assessing viability, feasibility, and desirability. So what I've seen in many slides before, and I've made slides actually before and presented them to people on the left-hand side here, where they say, start with desirability and then just work your way through desirability, and magically, you hit that perfect intersection of innovation. I find it's more probably along the lines of the right-hand side, especially dealing with a more practical situation in a startup, where you're kind of starting desirability and then you've got to consider the business needs and then the tech side of things, and you slowly loop back and forth until you can sort of get closer to that intersection if the project progresses that far. So just because this is a subscription model, which I'll touch on shortly, I think a good metaphor, if we did want to become a $100 million business or $1 million business, $100 million, we can either have, if we're making low account revenue per account, 1 million mice to make a $100 million business, or it'd be on the other side. If we're making around $1 million per customer, we only need 100. So we're very focused on the situation of mice, not that the people are the mice, but the metaphor is important to understand that into the future, we could then look at, is it more profitable to raise ARPA through upgrades and cross-selling, aka moving the mice more towards the rabbits, or is it more profitable or better to actually increase our customer base, which would be finding more mice? So iteration number one. So a classic generative research project, we basically want to explore, is there an opportunity area worth doing anything with? So the design challenges in this phase, again, tackling, is there an opportunity? From the desirability perspective, what do our customers want? From a viability perspective, what does the back of the envelope look like? From the feasibility qualification, what tech might support this? We initially allocated 2.5 weeks, and on the right-hand side, we're kind of the green dot, just about to get started into the desirability phase. So qualification number one, as good designers, quant qual enables us to make a good decision. So we set up with our customer champion base, 16 in-depth interviews. So they're one-on-one interviews run with a mix of engaged, new, and potential future users. We also conducted an initial survey collecting 221 responses, both from repeat and active users and less active users. Of course, did a bit of desktop research, and then off the back of all the research, some affinity mapping and insights analysis. On the right-hand side, you can see Natalie interviewing one of the customers, and as well as an example of the Discovery Health Survey, which is made up of approximately 10 questions. And on the far right, Mira, back when we used to love Mira, it would have been on FigJam if FigJam was out, the insights mapping. So our findings from this particular exercise was that while we kind of have a good understanding of our customer base at the moment, a very diverse user base, where users engage with our service for varied needs. If you look at our standard personas, we have people that have been totally cool with their health, everything's going sweet, and all of a sudden they have a health scare, and then they're like, all right, this is now the most important thing in my life, I need to make a change, and they have dramatic impacts. Other people are more along the worried well type persona, where they're kind of a bit more worried about anything that might happen. Other people are kind of, I don't really need to know anything. Other people are really concerned with health, fitness, they want to be the best, they're super competitive, they're going to the gym every now and then. So after the back of the initial desirability qualification, we found that even with our current service, 86.4% of all respondents would pay $1 or AUD or more. And off the back of that, we developed 3 particular personas that were willing to pay. So one being the health optimizers, one being transitioning to self-care. If you're familiar with superannuation, similar to transitioning to retirement, similar age group and persona, and then health scare affected. Looking at the viability aspect. So typically we'd want to put together a quick back of the envelope, and this was a digital back of the envelope because we did it on Excel, so it's not technically a back of the envelope. But we just basically wanted to make a bunch of assumptions to say, from a business viability aspect, would moving forward with this type of project make sense? So we put together a quick model, basically worst case, likely case, best case. Again, lots of assumptions made. We weren't that informed in this particular stage yet, but I'll talk you through where we progress this moving forward. So at a worst case, we're not even going to break even within the 5-year mark. We're actually making a loss the whole time. The likely case, if we can get around 25 station users per day, we're looking to pay off the station in around 20 months. And best case, if we can get around 35 station users per day, again, assumed a 2% conversion for existing members, a 1% conversion of new members, and a 4% churn of the actual member base. So this is really important to quantify that if we're going to progress with this, it needs to be in a high footfall traffic station location. So obviously looking at the feasibility qualification, are there any platforms we could leverage? As mentioned before, we're heavily constrained with our dev resources. So is there anything we can take advantage of? So in terms of payments, we looked to Chargebee and we ran a really quick proof of concept. Now, if anyone's done any front-end development before, you think it's very funny. We did the POC actually using W3 schools and saved that tab. And then on the right-hand side, just plain HTML, you can click through. We just tested that potentially you could order a premium offering and what that looks like. Not connected yet, but it's us just doing the initial groundwork for feasibility qualification. So after that iteration number 1, we've kind of got to the point where there's enough initial data to move to iteration 2. We've got 2 targeted personas, again, the health optimizers, which I'm not going to go into detail, and transitioning to self-care, and then some potential packages we can package up to them. So next iteration is approved. From there, we moved on to iteration number 2. Again, you can think of it as a second version of the project, second phase, iteration number 2. In this particular iteration, we're kind of happy with that initial data, but we hadn't quite reached data saturation through the qualitative insights, as well as the business needed more numbers to confirm at scale, is this something viable? So on the right-hand side, we allocated 3 weeks for this, this particular iteration. And now we've kind of done a whole loop of the desirability, viability, and feasibility, and we're coming a little bit closer to the middle. So from a desirability perspective, what exactly is our value proposition? We've got a good understanding of our customer profile on the right-hand side of the value prop canvas, but on the left, we need to refine our pain relievers, we need to refine our gain creators, and then define the service a little better. What kind of numbers can we expect conversion? What features are desirable? From a feasibility perspective, can we be a bit more specific? We've made a lot of assumptions on the initial back of the envelope. Can we build through that? And then from a viability perspective, what does the initial package look like for the business to deliver? What are the project key milestones? So this here is a really important question we sort of posed ourselves at the start of iteration 2. And it's how is it possible to validate assumptions from phase 1 without actually building the full service? As mentioned before, we didn't have that luxury. So I went back to an old e-commerce trick. If anyone's ever tried to spin up a Shopify store or do anything in between without actually ordering the product, the traditional way is either one, you create a landing page and try to get people to sign up. That's a traditional story. Or other versions, you'd actually create your Shopify store, Photoshop a few images together, say, yeah, we're selling this product, sold out, register, we'll let you know when it's back on. And then you can make educated decisions without having to put in the pre-order, without even having to order, outlay any money apart from the Shopify and the time. So we mimicked the same sort of thing by creating these test intent to purchase screens, where we took the model on the left here. This one was targeted at health optimizers. Again, Canva quickly whipped a video around what we'd offer in this feature package. And then we said, coming soon, you can either join the wait list or you could skip if you're not interested. And that's a way of us indicating, are people interested in this particular package or not? We segmented those users based on particular health metrics, and we ran a few different packages. So in cohort 1, we tested subscription payment. We tested once-off payment from optimizers, transitioners. Again, we had 2 versions of subscription. We had 2 versions of once-off. And then we put out a general population one. Again, 2 versions of subscription model, and then a single once-off version. And as you can see here, we initially made the assumptions of around a 2% conversion. These numbers were fantastic, I would say, looking at 22%, 15%, even for the once-off, 59%. But there is a issue here that we hadn't fully considered, which I'll touch on in a second. So again, taking that quant data, building that quant data out a little bit more and doing a bit more analysis. Again, that worked at PwC and data analytics for a long time before transitioning into pure design. And it's super helpful going through and basically churning that quantitative data in Power BI to find out, statistically significant. If you're over 35, you're more likely to subscribe to a particular package. Another interesting thing, smokers are more willing to pay. There was no direct effect on first-time users versus return health check users, so that was quite positive to back up. Again, we worked through on the right-hand side the value proposition canvas, done in FigJam as well. What are the jobs to be done from our customer? What are their current pains and gains? We've got a good understanding of that, why people use a SiSU health service in general. But it was really about us refining how how is this particular feature set actually resolving those pains? How is it creating the gains? And exactly what is that service? So continue to refine that through more user research and more interviews. From a viability qualification, I couldn't really show you this, but off the back of the test intent to purchase screen data that we have, we basically took those numbers, what people are willing to pay, how many people, etc., and we plugged that back into the financial model. So now we're making a more educated decision on, are people going to move forward with this? What's the potential revenue look like? What kind of acquisition rate can we expect? So the caveats, of course, people say one thing and they'll do another. Even if people say, yeah, join waitlist, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to capture their money or they're going to send up standard sort of conversion funnel. You definitely get drop off from showing intent to being interested to making that final purchase. So just as a blanket rule in that financial model, we just assumed a 40% drop off rate going from showing intent to actually making the purchase. From the feasibility perspective, again, we dug deeper into Charge B, making sure it's GDPR compliant. It has an EU data center because we are GDPR compliant as well. We looked at Stripe, we looked at Learn Worlds, if we could potentially leverage a few of our program and planners and kind of give that an uplift and make it more of a premium service. So off the back of the findings from here, we ended up actually ditching the personal package, the personalized packages. While they did get good interaction and really good shown of interest, the member base was quite constrained and small. There's only a certain amount of health optimizers in our database that they'd interact with. There's only a certain amount of transitioning to self-care. So we needed to be a bit more general. Second aspect of it makes the marketing much simpler. It makes it much easier to manage as well as much easier to build if we're rolling with a single package that we offer everyone. And then we moved into the next phase. Instead of tying things together, just having single features and finding out, is there desire for this particular feature at scale? We wanted to isolate those particular variables. So we decided after iteration 2, we still have enough data to persevere to another iteration, spend a bit more time diving deep into it. Iteration number 3, diving into the detail. So at this point, again, desirability, now we need to get into a bit more of the interaction design, a bit more of the service design. What's the end-to-end customer journey look like? How are people interacting on the station, on the digital touch point, on the mobile responsive website, on the actual website, etc. Where should they pay? Is it on the station? Is it somewhere else? Is it at a later time? From feasibility, again, we wanted to really map out what are the big ticket dev items, and from a viability perspective, can we build a user base of alpha users, etc. What's that roadmap going to look like? Again, the next loop has happened. So getting into the customer journey mapping, as you know, it's super important to take a high-level approach and a high-level view before we get into the drill down in the detail of the actual screens and doing the screen flow. So we took a step back. What are our different users? We're going to have new users, we'll have new free users, returned free users, and we'll have premium users. How do we tackle their experience both on the station, on the portal, ensuring that while we do have multiple touch points, is that experience seamless? Is it natural? Tying in with this, what are the communication channels that come off the back of that? How are they then going to flow onto the next stage? So again, more research. Again, research, you can never get enough research. Running through different station flows, mapping out the end-to-end customer journey, and then going into a bit more detail of the actual UI screen flows. Again, really rough, running them past people, making sure each section makes sense. And then post to what we saw before, can we actually isolate our independent variables? So previously what we had done is we packaged 3 features up together in a single package, and people either responded well to that package or not as well to that package. But it didn't give us clarity on, did they respond well to the package because they really liked feature 1 and 2, but hated feature 3, or anything between. So we broke the test intent to purchase screens down by feature only. And we ran that test again for another 3 weeks. And off the back of that, we could find out that delivering heart age is the most desired feature. And then post that, we're looking at basically how you compare, see where your health ranks against everyone else in a similar age group and demographic. Then building in a bit more body comp, so taking that body fat percentage, looking at muscle mass, total body water, etc. And then number 4 was goal setting, so enabling people to set health goals and then keeping them accountable throughout the process. So we plugged in the numbers again. I've had to hide everything here. We took a very I'd say open approach to this, where we only said half the amount of checks we standard get Let's say we have a trim factor of 50%. We even looked at a trim factor of 70%. That's that drop-off rate I talked about before. And just to calculate, now, does once-off make sense? Even though more people are actually opting in for the once-off and less on the subscription in the long term, as you know, as a service subscription model traditionally will perform better. And of course, we can forecast our revenue as well. So we've kind of ticked that off there, and we've decided it is good enough to persevere again. So this next stage is really around shaping the roadmap, shaping, scoping, building out the service, and then launching. So iteration 4, again, we're a bit closer now. We're gonna just about to jump into a lot more of the tech feasibility aspect to it. What's the, what tech needs a proof of concept? Is it gonna be charge B, or that was kind of checked off? Is there anything else like a paywalls, for example? What will be delivered actually in the first release? Again, coming back to that sort of lean MVP startup approach. We really want to get something out in the market and then iterate on top of that. And where do we actually roll out our first surface? Is it going to be in the UK? Is it going to be in Victoria? Is it going to be across a few stores in Priceline pharmacies here in Australia? So we took a really high level approach with this one. Again, trying to keep the roadmap broken into what I call big ticket items for each function. On the left-hand side here, you can see the cogs, and they're sort of representative of the major development tasks that need to be done. The little pencils are design. These little sparks are communications, and this graph is analytics. Of course, accounting for testing time throughout there, kind of working with each of the heads of each of the function and their team to decide, okay, what are the big ticket items? How do we break this down? Can we deliver that in a 6-week period or not? What's the iteration that we can deliver in that 6-week period? And then push off the rest. So this shaping and scoping has been going through in quite a lot of detail. Unfortunately, when I originally said I'd give this presentation, we would have launched by now, but given a few things that happened on the side, we've actually delayed it a little bit. So we're still in the build phase and we won't be rolling out for another few weeks. But that doesn't mean I can't talk to you guys about iteration number 5, what's next. So finding product market fit, leveraging Superhuman's process. So if no one's familiar with Superhuman, it's an email. Basically, their goal was to become the fastest email client ever. And we talk about kind of product market fit. So Mark Andreessen, he's got quite a long summary on it. You can read. He kind of says you can feel when it is happening and when it's not happening. I traditionally more define it as, if you look at a value proposition canvas, is your service resolving the pains that your customer has? Is it enabling the customer achieve the gains? Is it matching the jobs to be done in the customer profile? So Superhuman founder, CEO, Raul, and this is definitely pronounced wrong, Vora, took this to the next level. So he talks about, okay, can we calculate a product market fit score? And what does that product market fit score look like? So it's made up predominantly of 4 questions. We took a variation of this when I first joined SiSU Health. 1, how would you feel if you could no longer use SiSU Health services? Again, 3 options: very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, not disappointed at all. What type of people do you think would most benefit from SiSU Health and the member portal? What's the main benefit you receive, and how can we improve the service for you? And an additional question that I have on the right-hand side: are you interested in becoming a customer champion? I think working with bigger corporates, we would have the luxury of working with a recruitment agency such as Farah, and we'd have a lot of money to say, yep, we can pull 100 people through or pull 10 people through. Let's get them in for customer testing. Where being a smaller startup, we don't really have that luxury, so we have to be quite tight with the money we do spend. So we're able to create this customer champion base that we can reach out to. It's sort of an exclusive type program where they are first contacted for research, if we want to do user testing, whatever that looks like. And they're super proud to be involved as well. And they're typical health champions. They've either had great health outcomes or changes, or we have stories losing 45 kilos, keeping themselves accountable on the station, whatever that might be. So back to this here, calculating the product market fit survey. On the right-hand side, you can see our results from running this the first time. And again, the caveat on this is it's not a paid service. So you'd be surprised if it was anything, if more people were not disappointed. So the product market fit score, again, is a leading indicator. So it helps you kind of predict where you're going to the future, as opposed to NPS, which is more of a trailing type metric. That's measuring how you did before, where Raul kind of took the assumption, let's look into the future and how we kind of reach that product market fit. After doing a lot of case studies, he's sort of found if you can get around 40% or above on the very disappointed, you're really on a good track and you sort of reached product market fit. So going from here, it's kind of a 4-step process. We would take this customer base and you'd segment to find out the supporters and paint a picture of the high expectation customers, again, on the right-hand side. high expectation customers are the ones that be very disappointed. As a second step, you'd analyze the feedback to try to convert everyone that's somewhat disappointed. We want to move them to the very disappointed, and the people that not disappointed at all, you basically just have to say they're a lost cause. We'll have to let them go. And then there's some other really intelligent things you can do around looking at the high value customers, on who's paying what and what are they asking for, etc. Off the back of the questions, which I touched on before. What type of people do you think most benefit, and what's the main benefit for that particular type of person? Then number 3, refine the roadmap by doubling down on what users love and addressing what is holding others back. So spending about half the time of the roadmap making the very disappointed people even happier, and then half the time of the roadmap making the somewhat disappointed people happy to try to convert them over the fence. And then number 4, rinse and repeat the process, ensuring that the product market fit score, again, coming back to this number here, is the most important metric, and continuing through that. There's a really great article that's been written on this, review.firstround. Maybe I'll send it around. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. So a few hot tips before we close things off. Just at a high level, if I was going to go back and change a few of these things, I'd test separate features instead of multiple packages initially early on. Well, it was kind of a nice feeling to find out that all the packages and the research that we did was really good. We were targeted with the personas, we hit data saturation, and that proved at scale that people did want that. Kind of put us in the position that we couldn't actually use any of that. We needed to take sort of a step back and focus on features and more of a general approach. The second aspect is more closely aligned with the customer problem at all stages. I think, especially at a startup, you really need to consider other aspects. There were times where we were being driven predominantly by the business or the tech side of things, where we were like, wait a minute, what's a customer problem that we're solving if we even move to this stage, or if we don't do that? And just ensuring we're always tying back to that customer problem. Another luxury we didn't really have is to do the technical proof of concepts beforehand. There's some friction on things that are being delivered that we had to make some assumptions when we did the journey mapping and we got into a bit of the detail of the screen flows, etc. That potentially could have been resolved if we had the time for a technical person to do a few of the proof of concepts. And always try to keep things simple and modular. I think it's very easy to try to dig in the details straight away, and there's 100 different options. But if you can always take that end-to-end high-level approach first, that it will help. And then again, looking at the SaaS side of things, just a few important things to consider. Now, you need to have a paywall position that makes sense. It should tell a story. It should be a natural progression. If someone's a free user and they want more features, you're building off there. It can't be something totally new, totally separate. It definitely takes time to optimize. So finding that product market fit, although it's a 4-step process, it's going to take time for sure. And trying to cater to your high value users, not just everyone. So it's interesting actually when you go and cut and segment the data, the people that were not disappointed at all, what they're asking for compared to the people that were would be very disappointed. It'd be an interesting exercise no matter where you work. And then of course, people that have invested information or they've invested anything into your product and service are more likely to stick around. And then just different options of how we can advertise, but not going over the line, given we are a health service and we do want to keep our core health check free. And then the final thing is being familiar with the cost to serve and understand what a healthy conversion rate is. So without any further ado, I would like to say thank you. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we can open the floor to questions now.
Thanks, Fabrizio. That was really great to hear how you talk to us, how you move through from discovery, research, through the ideation phase, through those things of understanding desirability, viability, and feasibility. We've got some questions from the floor for you. And to ask to you the first question, what is the prescription telehealth service?
Yes. Do they work also in telehealth prescription? Depends. No, so I guess it's a popular thing. You know, there's a lot of companies at the moment, Doctors on Demand, Kin, etc., that enable people to have ongoing and repeat medication. For example, the pill or particular types of blood pressure medication. So instead of going to a doctor and then taking that script to the pharmacy and then fulfilling that order there, they can actually do everything online and sort of have that that catered to them. So if you look at it from a service design perspective, you're basically taking the doctor consult, going to the doctor away, you're having to go into the pharmacy away, and then you're making that whole process a lot simpler and seamless. So you can have that medication delivered to you after, of course, it's been reviewed by a doctor. I hope that answered the question as well. If you want more detail, we can chat after.
Cool. So there's another question, a few more questions there. At the very start, it was great to see how you talked about the tools you use in the process of things there. And you talked about Figma. Got a question there about Figma, and you talked about FigJam. It's recently been released, and why do you like it more than Miro?
Oh, hands down. Coming back again, we're a startup. We don't really pay for much. So if you have a paid version of Miro, it's likely that you're happy with Miro. But if you don't have a paid version, if you ever try to do, I would say, 2,000 plus post-it notes and different diagrams on a maximum of 3 Miro files, you'll realize that they really lag, and it's a real killer. It could take up to 5 minutes even just to load the thing. So FigJam, super quick. And also the best thing is you can copy paste the stuff over from Figma. So if we do have screen flows or user flows or our design system already built out in Figma, it makes it super easy just to transition, whip up a diagram and send it over to devs and say, actually, this is the correct flow. Therefore, I love FigJam. Cool.
To the next question then, why do you think that over 35s are more likely to subscribe?
Yes, we do know. This, again, sorry to not answer this question, but it's, again, part of the, I don't know, maybe I should say, is anyone else here work in a similar competing health company? And I could tell this information. I might just say blanket, it potentially has to do with, if you've ever been young before and you've heard a saying, when you're young people, you think you're invincible. And a lot of people do, and they don't really consider their health much until you get to a particular point. And then you realize that, oh, actually, this is something I need to take into consideration. So without giving too much of an answer, that's kind of the crux of it.
Cool. You talked earlier about moving customers from spaces to a new space as far as retention and adoption. Question here, why or how can it be a good thing to have 50% of people being very disappointed? Can you explain that?
Oh, yes. Okay, for sure. So not very disappointed with your service, very disappointed if they could no longer use the service. Yeah, sorry if I wasn't super clear on that. But yeah, the question is stated, how would you feel if you could no longer use Figma, for example? How would you feel if you could no longer use Australia Post? So the more people that would be very disappointed, the better. If not disappointed at all, they're kind of like, I don't care. If you go tomorrow, to be honest, I'm doing my own thing.
Cool, thanks. Another question there, how do you keep tech and product design on track together all the way through the iterations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I've seen, it's a tough thing as well. Big companies, small companies, I haven't really seen any company that gets it really right. I think from my perspective on that, given that we are a small company, we can have touch points with the dev team, we can have touch points with the product team. And because, again, we only have 31 employees, but still, to be frank with you, we still struggle with this. We're still kind of siloed in some regard. So at a leadership type level, again, always reporting the status, ensuring that showcases are happening for everyone, that sort of scoping and shaping exercises are super important to be done. So we sat down for an entire week with the head of dev and his lead developer. We literally walked through every single thing. We spent up to 7 or 8 hours going through and breaking things down to a bit more detail before we'd publicize that and say to the CEO, yep, this is the roadmap, this is exactly the timeframes, etc. We ensured that we kind of had that agreed upon before moving forward.
Cool. One last thing, and I think it's a comment from Tash, if I can use the name since she posted it there. She'd love to know how the project is going around pricing and packaging, and it's possibly the riskiest thing a company can do. She loves how thorough you were with the process and how you described that to us.
Thank you very much, Tash. I appreciate that. So the project, again, is currently in build. So again, we've kind of scoped out everything and we have a good sort of tech roadmap to move forward with. At the moment, design, we're a little bit ahead. We have all the designs sort of ready to go. And in the design sense, we're already kind of looking at the next release and how we're going to build from there. So we're, again, I couldn't give you an accurate quote because something's coming up. We have priority shifting all the time. I think as a company, we're still trying to find that one thing that will take us the scale. So I can't give you the exact time frame, but I'd say it will be in weeks instead of months before we can launch. And then off the back of that, in terms of the pricing, we just had brand new fresh data today. I've been asked not to actually give the pricing, but send me a message offline and I can tell you what it is when it's not being recorded.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Fabrizio. I'd like now to introduce our second speaker for the night. We've got Stephanie De Rosso. I hope I get that surname right, Stephanie.
Yeah,
good. Cool, excellent. So Stephanie is a strategist and a designer and a leader, and she is the head of user experience design at NAB. And her current work has her focusing on business strategy, digital product and service proposition development, creative innovation and strategic design. Prior to working at NAB, Stephanie worked for Deloitte, and Clodagh and I found out that Fabrizio and Steph used to work together.
Yep, in the same team.
Yeah, cool. Now, so in that time she worked at Deloitte, she was there as a design strategist, assisting clients across banking and finance. Maybe the move to NAB there, maybe across telcos, government and utility sector. Stephanie is also an expert in the field of design thinking, having spent 4 years obtaining a Doctor of Philosophy, focusing on design thinking in a complex practice. She's passionate about education and has spent the last 8 years teaching undergraduate and master courses in design across various unis in Australia. Drawing on 12 years of experience in design and design thinking for complex problems, Stephanie likes to write on the intersection of design practice and academia. And lately she's been focusing on design. And she has also been working around strategic differentiation, business proposition and development. And tonight she's going to talk to us about the usefulness of customer journey mapping and service design with UX for SaaS. So Stephanie, I'll very happily hand over to you.
Thank you. That introduction pretty much covers everything about me, so I don't need to jump in with anything else. I just want to double check that everyone can just see my screen and the front slide, and that's all good. Okay, great, because I'm in this new presentation mode. I've only used a couple of times in Keynote, and I've got my notes on the side. So yes, just to add to that, I, currently head of experience design at NAB. So I look after the retail and consumer area at NAB, and we have now roughly about 40 designers in our team, which is amazing. We've sort of grown quite a bit over the last couple of years, and our design team consists of basically almost equal number of UXs and CXs. CX meaning basically, you could interchange CX with service designers or strategic designers, depending on who you talk to. There is a nuance there. That would be a talk for another day. But what I'm going to do is hone in on how basically we can leverage or add more depth and context around user experience using some tools and methods from service design, which is pretty much what we do every single day at NAB. It won't be focused so much on case studies from NAB, like Fabrizio was sort of referring to his current work in his presentation. This is definitely taking more of the form of probably what I'd lean on to most comfortably, which is lecturing and teaching. So I've taken the assumption that everyone here is, obviously, working in some kind of SaaS field or, SaaS company, and that your background is probably deep within UX, but maybe a little bit newer to service design. And I'm assuming sort of more of a basic knowledge and level of UX as well. So some of this might seem fundamental, some of it might seem new, and hopefully everyone can take a little bit out of it. Okie dokie. So it kind of makes sense if we're looking at user experience and software as a service that we actually hone in on two keywords here, predominantly service and experience, and how we can leverage, as I've mentioned before, service design and some of the elements of service design to really make that bridge between user experience and service experience. So in our discussion, or what I'm going to talk about today, is what is a service experience, aka service design. I kind of want to make this a little bit interactive if possible. I don't know how that's going to work out. It sometimes works out well. But basically, I kind of want to see where everyone's knowledge is at around service design. It's a fairly newish field. And we sort of go through a little bit of the history from UX to service design and now a newer field called strat design. We'd probably say that strategic design is maybe roughly 5 to 10 years old. Service design is probably getting to 20. Same, UX a little bit longer, but UX when it first started obviously wasn't called UX. So just to get a sense check of everyone's knowledge base around service design, given that it is still a little bit new for some people in the design field, we are going to play a little bit of buzzword bingo. So what I've got here is some very common terminology within the service design field or how to describe service design. And if everyone could maybe either yell out or pop in the chat how many service design terms or words you can find in this little word puzzle. So I'm just going to open up my chat here and then I'll reveal all of the words in a minute. And don't be afraid to unmute. Or actually, if you want to get a little bit fancy, you can click on the annotate tool and actually circle the words that you find. So let's do that. If you can see a word in here, click on the annotate tool and circle around the word that you can see. And it will be from top to bottom, left to right, and also diagonally. So take a look around. I feel like I need music here. Yes, touch points. Mickey, you can circle around touch points. I can't even see where it is here. I do have the answers coming up next. It almost makes you go a bit cross-eyed. Users, awesome. Journey, brilliant. There's roughly, I think I popped in here around 10 or 12. Could be a little bit more. And I'm just going to talk a little bit freely as everyone has a little look around here. Oh, we've got half of one. So point is definitely one, but there's the first section of a word that's added to point that's missing. Pain point, yes. Brilliant. Customers, yep. Mapping, yep. Awesome. Feel free to circle around the ones that you see. Story is half of a word as well. So keep looking diagonally. We might end up getting a photo bomber here at some point because I have a very excitable kitten that's running around at the moment. So if you hear a meow, that would be him. He might jump up on the screen in a moment. Yes, storytelling, that is the full word. Okay, I'll give it one more minute before I reveal the answers here. Actually, there's quite a few. I think I popped in 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, there's 18 actually. There's 18 words in here. Getting stuck. Yes, we've got experience. Brilliant. A couple key terms which still haven't cropped up yet. Okay, couple more seconds if anyone can see. Diagonally, there's probably a keyword here. Moment of truth, brilliant. Alrighty, so I'll reveal the words that are. So whoop, if I can clear the annotation actually, let me just jump up and I'll just clear this, clear all drawings. There we go. So this is the result. So we had here service design, experience, users, customers, blueprint, journey mapping, front stage, backstage, channels, touch points, moment of truth, pain points, storytelling, and end-to-end. So all common keywords when we talk about service design or when people refer to different service design methods. Okay, so I'm just going to exit out of annotate. So it's probably a good idea now to actually uncover, what is involved in terms of what we mean around a service experience. So what is a service experience and what is the difference between a service experience and a user experience when we talk about the difference in practice and I guess methods and approach. So a service experience generally focuses on a holistic point of view of a product service. So we heard Fabrizio talk about that as well when you're referring to end-to-end approach of looking at the customer experience or journey. It aims to support achieving a particular goal. One of the key elements around service design is that it exists across time and space and channels, whereas when we think about user experience, it tends to be a touch point or a point in time. We also find that service design tends to express itself through frameworks and blueprints, and I'll touch on a little bit of that later. We do also use journey maps in service design. It also focuses on personas, as is often found in UX. It observes the broader context and situation of use, takes into account both the internal business and external point of view. So DVF is often kind of integrated within service design practice as well, as we saw with Fabrizio's presentation. It also emphasizes meeting needs, as with most design practice, and it often aims to tell a story as well. So it really sort of seeks to amplify and marry the human-centered design with business needs as well. So if we look at the user experience, when, this is probably, not new to anyone here, that, user experience emphasizes meeting usability. It observes an exact use. It focuses generally on one touch point at a time. It's a linear use of interaction. It's very tactical. It looks at interactions to enable use and things like that. But actually where the two tend to cross over, where we find often, say, user experience designers maybe transitioning into service design, there's some commonalities that allow a bit of a bridge between the two practices, because in the past, as through teaching and even having designers in our team, user experience designers sometimes are curious about stepping into CX or service design, and they're not quite sure how to make that leap, or it seems really daunting and strategic and kind of very complicated, when actually there's some very close commonality. It's more about adding depth to it. So at this intersection of UX and service experience or service design, we find that the commonalities are, it aims to support achieving a goal. So both practices tend to do that. Customer journey mapping is quite a good bridge between the two disciplines or practices, which we're going to dive into. It aims to uncover pain points and blockers, and also tends to be centered around a persona, as with a lot of design work as well. So I tend to go a little bit academic sometimes in my presentations, hence the background. I can't help it, having come from academia. This is a model that was that I had created through some of the research that I did in my thesis. And I present this often to try and situate for people where different design practices tend to sit, because sometimes it's hard to understand, what is the difference between different practices? Where do they sit on kind of like a scale of design? How do they interrelate with each other? How do they overlap? And the best way to kind of visualize that is this kind of typology of design practices, I would, call this. So on the lower level, we tend to find practices that are low in complexity, a bit more concrete. Now, the caveat to this before I go into it is that having a design practice on the high levels doesn't denote or imply that it's more important or it's more, significant. It's just more around complexity. And there's complexity in all layers of design. It's just more, generally there's differences in scope and focus. So on the baseline, we have what we would find traditional design practice, which is focus on artifact. And those are things like fashion design, graphic design, jewelry design, UI, and things like that. Second to that, we see that the design disciplines then focus a little bit more on artifact and the experience with that artifact. So that's where we tend to find user experience coming into play. Behavioral design is now an upcoming discipline in that space. Human-centered design, interaction design, and human-computer interaction. moving up the complexity line, we see then a focus on service systems and behavior. So we're going from the artifact to actually looking at the end-to-end experience or system. And this is where we see service design really come into play. Urban planning tends to fall in this category as well. Architecture, strategic design, wayfinding could be classified as this because you're interacting with different, physical points and the behavior of that, as well as cultural and anthropological design, which is also another interesting subdiscipline of design practice. And at the very top, we have then a larger focus on, large scale systems and systemic design. So transition design is one field that plays in that space, looking at environmental, sustainable design, policy design, and international relations, which are all areas that actually have adopted design practice. On the policy front, the Australian Taxation Office has actually used design thinking and design practice of all layers for the last, would have been maybe 30 years so far. So this is at a high level really just to situate where service and user experience kind of sit in the typology of design and how they broadly differ. And if I had to loosely relate it to the different kind of layers of, those sort of as a service industries, we've got largely at the more systemic scale, infrastructure as a service, then looking at system and artifact and behavior, we've got platform as a service, and then at the bottom, we have SaaS. Okie dokie. So looking here now around when we actually get into the practice, what is different? So we know kind of where the layers in terms of scope and scale of design and the focus of the different design disciplines, but where can we actually start to make that transition between the activity from UX to, say, service design or CX? So in sort of referencing the layers that I have here on the left-hand side, looking at the lower complexity and concrete type of focus areas and methods up to the high complexity, and zooming in on just that, those two layers between artifact and experience where user experience sits in, and then the service systems and behavior layer, which is where service design sits. And broadly, most design practice tends to focus on three key buckets. So one is looking at the feeling and the experience. Second is around what people are doing, what actions are they taking, and then thinking and behavior. And we tend to find a lot of the methods fall within one of these three categories. So in this middle bit is really where we see that intersection between UX and service design or CX really kind of coming out most clearly. So looking at the more focused design, the thing right, which we've got the user flows, task flows, really honing in on what actually the wireframes and the screens are. And then evolving from that and taking into a little bit more context and a broader scale, we then start to see customer journey mapping as that real intersection, taking that leap from actual artifact into broader service behavior and service design. And then further methods under service design, we have things like service blueprints, which I'll give an example of later. And really a lot of that is hung under this kind of umbrella of a job to be done or a particular goal of a persona or a group of people. So I'm going to assume that a few people maybe aren't familiar with journey maps. So I thought I'd introduce really a very basic, most common template of a customer journey map that's often used, and we'll kind of dive into after this, break it down into what the elements are. But if I really, tried to visualize my own journey in my career, I can do that in a journey map. And here you'll see that there's, basically phases of my career journey. So up the top line here, we have the years that particular phases took. We have the steps that I've taken throughout, my career. And then we have a emotion line in terms of how I felt going on this journey, some very big highs and some very lows, with a few call outs in terms of what I was thinking and feeling at the time. And I've sort of used this as an example, purely to kind of show that a journey map doesn't have to be quite a zoomed in focus on a very specific set of touch points or a particular task or user flow. You can actually zoom out and really look at someone's life scale or life experience. And, that's one of the benefits of using journey maps, that you can really zoom in and out in terms of scale and focus. So if we kind of break down what most journey maps tend to have in common, they all tend to have phases of the experience, as we can see up the top here. They also tend to have certain actions or steps that are taken by the individual. They all tend to display some kind of sentiment or emotion line. And they also have generally some kind of key call out. So usually it's a moment of truth where something insightful may have happened in that journey, or a certain pivot in that journey. They often highlight pain points, which really gives a good visualization of where there's issues along the customer journey. And they also tend to highlight thoughts and feelings, so we really can contextualize the journey map. And again, that's one of the great uses of journey mapping, is that if you do customer research, or you're doing even UX research rather than going into testing, you could start to gather some more broader contextual information about your customers or users by actually having a customer journey template and taking that to the interview and asking them to really detail what their journey is. It becomes a really nice talking point and focuses the user or the customer onto something other than perhaps feeling nervous in a user testing interview, which we find a lot of customers tend to sometimes feel. So I would definitely encourage using a journey map as a conversation tool in your interviews, not just as something that you would potentially visualize or use as a byproduct of synthesis. So I was potentially going to do an exercise here, but I might leave it to the end if we do have time. Feel free to screenshot this. I know that this is going to be recorded and played back later. You can use this for your own template if you want to walk away and maybe practice sort of detailing in your own, jobs that you're working in. Basically, use this as a template, detail the phases of that particular customer journey that, is part of your service, add the steps, the time it takes, and, any kind of emotions and thoughts. And I would highly encourage you to just practice that if you haven't been familiar with customer journey mapping before. Okay, so we kind of know the basics of a journey map and what some commonalities are between, the basic foundations of journey mapping, but they tend to come in different shapes and sizes. So you don't have to stick to a very basic, boring, linear approach. You can adopt the visualization or presentation of a journey map to suit the actual context or service or products that you're exploring in your own individual workplaces. So for example, one way you can visualize a journey map is to create one that's circular. And this is useful often for persistent lifestyle experiences within a product service, things that happen over quite a large scale and aren't necessarily short service experiences. So if you think of healthcare, again, that's a good example of one that you might look at as a, life cycle approach. Banking, definitely we've used a circular type of journey map in, at NAB to visualize maybe, customer life cycles. And if I move to the next one, you also have journey maps that tend to zoom out on experience. So this is kind of the approach that I took when I, talked through a little bit of the example of my own journey in my career. You can definitely take a real zoomed out view over a long period of time. It doesn't have to be just honed in on that particular task or user flow. And, this is great to give a real bigger picture, and it just sort of denotes how you can really zoom in on the macro or the micro of someone's particular journey. So the next type of journey maps we sometimes see can be quite illustrative, and these tend to work really well for visualizing complex service experiences or product service experiences. And also they're really, really useful to, primarily in my experience, trying to engage stakeholders to pay attention to a particular journey flow. So rather than looking at a dry process map, we would often visualize some of our customer journey maps and stick them up on a wall, print them out like really big so that people will walk past, they're engaging, and actually pay attention to what that customer experience is. Because I'm not sure about anyone else, but sometimes it can be difficult to get stakeholders to pay attention to exactly what the customer need and experience is. Words on a page don't tend to work too well in most cases. I tend to err towards visualization and visual language. I highly recommend trying to visualize as much as possible around experience and human behavior. So illustrative journey maps are really useful for stakeholder engagement. And then finally, probably the most basic kind that you would see often if you Google, journey maps is ones that are a little bit more storyboard driven. So this is where we take the approach of basic storyboarding, as you would see akin to, say, filmmakers would storyboard out their particular narrative, some simple like stick diagrams or sketches to storyboard out what that experience is. And then you would have the basic touch points or the emotion line kind of operating underneath. So this approach tends to really emphasize storytelling again, more so in that traditional like movie storyboard format. So then we have maps that start to get a little bit more detailed, a little bit more tactical, as we would probably call it. And this is an example of one that is definitely a lot more detailed, and it has a broader focus than what we've seen before. And it starts to err a little bit away from more of that storytelling, emotive, illustrative approach that some of the other journey maps may take. So here, this is starting to bridge a little bit into what we would look at in service design or service blueprinting. So we have here the phases in most journey maps, the customer thoughts and feelings, their actions, and kind of maybe how they're feeling, touch points and devices, the people that are engaging. So this is a bit of a new section now that they've incorporated people and environments that are engaging in these steps of the journey, and then potential recommendations and scenarios here. So if I kind of highlight really generally what would be the difference between this and a standard journey map, is that the highlighted section in, I guess, looks like light green, what I've put here, that's probably more of that traditional journey mapping method where you have the thoughts and feelings, the phases, the actions, and the touch points. Underneath that is tend to where we see blueprinting getting, being built out in when we think of taking that next step from journey maps to blueprints, and that's the red area. So I'll give an example of what I mean by blueprints in the next slide, which is this one. So kind of similar, a blueprint will often have on the top half, roughly on the top half of the page, the customer journey map. And it's a good starting point to really situate what that experience is, that service experience. To then understand how best we can, I guess, uplift the service, what kind of blockers are operating in the back end, on the backstage of the service. It's often great to add in that second layer, which is what transforms a journey map to a blueprint, which is what is often termed a back of house or back of stage interactions. So front stage tends to be all the people, the touch points that the customer engages with and what they experience. And then backstage are all the behind the scenes actors, technology, processes that enable that service flow or that service experience to actually occur. So in mapping this out, you get a really great blueprint, essentially an architecture of that product service experience that you might be analyzing. And it can really uncover some interesting recommendations or insights into why pain points occur. Because sometimes, what we find when we do the blueprinting method is that customers will experience pain points at certain points in time where maybe tech doesn't align up with the business, or where there's maybe multiple handovers that are causing rework or time delays and things like that. So taking that next layer down from the customer experience into actual business operations can really uncover a lot of insight around the context of your, customer flow. Okay, so what I normally do at this point is I ask the question, if people are new to journey mapping, around what people feel are the benefits first around product and business development and innovation. So why would we want to use journey mapping to help us in product and business development and innovation? And feel free to unmute and answer or write it in the chat, and I'll reveal kind of each section as we go. So anyone take a guess on why we would use journey mapping for product and business innovation? Uncover opportunities. Yep, great. Breaking down silos, brilliant. Get stakeholders on board, call out gaps in knowledge. Excellent. So to uncover some of the main reasons why we might use a journey map for product and business development is to discover pain points and moments of truth across the customer experience, to uncover context, and that's probably the big point of difference between honing in on user flows or task flows with a journey map, is that you're actually broadening out the experience to uncover broader context of that actual task interaction. We also use it to situate the experience in context of key customers or user groups, visualize the use of your product or intangible service, and to zoom out to look at holistic experiences, as Fabrizio also mentioned as an example in his presentation. So again, looking at product and business improvement, so slightly different. Why would journey mapping help with business improvement? And any answers in the chat? So we've got one here, to see from your customer view instead of your business view. Yep. I feel like there's silence. I'll reveal it. There's some answers touched on the third point. So beneficial for product is business improvement in the sense that it can highlight areas of business improvement and opportunity. This again is really amplified more when you take that leap from journey mapping to service blueprinting. You really uncover the back end opportunities and areas of improvement. To know where to continue investigations with a deeper dive. So often using journey mapping, once we map out the experience, or we might do a blueprint, it actually highlights core phases where there's a lot of stuff happening or a lot of pain points where you say, okay, we don't really know in enough depth why this is happening. Let's do a mini deep dive and do some further research on that particular phase. It also helps to situate the impact of existing features in a single end-to-end view rather than just kind of zoning in on a particular task flow. And it also helps us to understand where and why the product or service is not hitting key metrics. So having that end-to-end view can really contextualize some of the core metrics that you might be zoning in on in your particular, say, focus for UX. And it also helps us gain a better understanding of the why behind disconnected hypotheses and outcomes. And the last one we have here around stakeholder management, which I think few comments came through and touched on. It's really useful to align disparate business stakeholders. And I think someone else mentioned it around getting them to rally around a customer-centric point of view. Because sometimes when we look at task flows and user flows, it gets very focused. You're kind of zooming in the detail, it gets very tactical, and you lose sight of the context and the actual end-to-end customer experience that is occurring. It helps to bring in a outside-in perspective. Often, as we know, business stakeholders can sometimes get too hung up on the business needs or the business requirements, and referring back to the end-to-end service experience or the journey can really just re-centralize that focus to the customer and their end-to-end experience. And it also humanizes and empathizes with the experience of a business process from a user perspective. And again, trying to bring out those stakeholders back to the customer needs and what the actual customer problem is. So just some handy resources for you. If you aren't familiar with service design or journey mapping, I've put in more service design resources here because I think it's a good place to actually look, because you probably are familiar a little bit with journey mapping, but to take that next step to maybe looking at service design methods and blueprinting, highly recommend looking at This is Service Design Thinking. It's basically a seminal textbook in service design. Practical Service Design is an awesome website with some great resources there as well. Nelson Norman Group has a good definition around service blueprints. And there's also a human-centered service design course on IDOU if you're keen to do some further education. And I'm kind of wrapping it up now, so I'll put it to questions, but I might just pop this on my final screen, which is if you want to reach out, those are the socials, all the socials there. So I will stop sharing my screen now. And thankfully, my kitten didn't disrupt my presentation.
Thanks very much for that, Stephanie. That was great to see how you talked us through the commonalities and intersection of service design and UX and where they sit within business, and then to really understand how we can apply, or start with what is a journey map, and then understand how we can apply that and how we can bring value through using that. There was one question. Actually, there were two questions there. Can a journey map be non-linear? Example, in retail, a customer may only experience a few touch points?
Yes, so journey maps can definitely be non-linear. I think often it's presented in a linear format because it kind of makes it gives most clarity when we're trying to present the experiences of customers. But there are very commonly journey maps that will go through, say, a couple steps, and then they might do a bit of a cycle, and then they do a couple steps, and then they'll visualize another cycle. So you might get those loops occurring in journey maps. But also the circular visualization of a journey map is one that is very cyclical, and you can showcase the fact that there's a big loop and there might be mini loops in that as well. So I would encourage, sort of as I mentioned before, to really play around with different basic visualizations of customer experiences that you're working through in your own workplace, to try and really capture what is that core experience of the customer, and what would best kind of hit the mark with your stakeholders and getting them to really understand what people go through. Because you might find that if the experience is really loopy in a lot of areas, don't force it into a linear format, because what you want to do is visualize that experience and complexity that the customer's going through. So loop it, visualize that.
Cool. And thinking about service design in NAB, what is it like within a big corporate?
I saw this question here, the challenges of service design within a big corporate like NAB. How can I summarize this? Maybe three key challenges. I would say the main challenge is that, yes, we need to be business minded. And yes, there are business constraints for a whole range of reasons. There's constraints mainly around budget, around cost, around delivery. And I think one of the major challenges is actually trying to, on the one hand, it's trying to get stakeholders on board with understanding the end-to-end experience that a customer goes through and get them thinking and from the customer's point of view. That being said, a lot of people are, they're very much in line with thinking about, what is best for the customer. So that's not lost within big corporates. It's more taking that next layer of design thinking. And then second to that, to actually get them to come on board with devoting a little bit more time and space to really deep diving and doing the research and the analysis that is required to really deeply understand the customer problem, map that out, and take that time and activity. So the big challenge that we have is that time is a massive constraint, and we're often squeezing the process and squeezing, what we can create in terms of visualizing what customers are going through. And sometimes it would be, really great to have a little bit more time and budget to do so. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is that having the time to do really good, decent design thinking, service design, journey mapping. And then second to that would be, for stakeholders that aren't that way inclined and they're a little bit more practical, they tend to glaze over a little bit when you talk about experience and maps and, things like that. They might think that it's a little bit impractical and fluffy. And really, when you take the next layer to looking at blueprinting is when their ears start to prick up, because it kind of is perceived to be a little bit more practical. So I recommend that if you're facing stakeholders that aren't necessarily coming on board with journey mapping, maybe take that next step to blueprinting and adding that layer of the blueprint to the journey map, which can sometimes be perceived as a bit more procedural and operational, and you might get their attention then.
Cool, thanks, Stephanie. Stephanie, early in the conversation, you talked about the intersection of service design and UX and where we hit in that Venn diagram. Can you explain, please, the difference between CX and service design? How do you differentiate that?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think a lot of people use the term CX in the design field as kind of synonymous with service design. I would probably find that, at least what I've noticed, is that you can do customer experience without having to actually adopt design thinking or design practice. So by that, I mean, there are actual functions in a lot of businesses that are called customer experience, business units, voice of customer, things like that don't actually use design. So you can practice customer experience without adopting design. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, you have CX within the design field, which again, I've sort of mentioned, it's becoming more synonymous with service design. But I find that there's CXs out there in the design field who tend to focus more on just deep user research. So they may not have been, I guess, practicing service design methods like blueprinting and things like that. They tend to be more experts in deep human-centered design research and synthesis and translating that into like reports and things like that. So that's probably where I see the nuance between CX practitioners to service design practitioners, but both are by and large pretty much the same in most respects.
Just a question for you to sit there, Stephanie. Of the things of, say, service design, UX, and customer experience, do you think there are any other emerging sort of roles coming out of all these three?
Yes, behavioral design and strategic design. So strat design is probably becoming more commonplace. I actually think Australia is a little bit progressive with adopting strat design compared to maybe other countries and businesses around the world. We're seeing kind of a consolidation of UX and UI into product design. That's become quite common in those big tech companies in the US. But definitely strat design is taking a lot of momentum in Australia, and behavioral design is a very big emerging subdiscipline of design practice.
Do you think strategic design is coming out of advertising into our field, or has it come from somewhere else?
I don't think it's advertising, but I can see where there's that understanding, because we think of brand strategy with strategic design. I see strat design more as pretty much really zooming in on like that DVF model, kind of similar to what Fabrizio was kind of detailing in his presentation, where you're really analyzing the business needs and requirements, and you're marrying that with design and customer needs and requirements, and you're finding that sweet spot between the two. Strat design tends to focus on proposition development as well. So we're looking at differentiation, proposition. That tends to err more towards traditional business strategy, but you're taking a design methodology in order to kind of execute on that.
Cool, thank you. Are there any other questions from anyone? I don't see any, but pop one in if there are. And maybe silence is golden. I'd like to thank Stephanie very much and Fabrizio for excellent presentations tonight. I hope the group in here have found something they can take away and apply to the things they do. And hopefully that's a job you love and you keep living the dream. I might hand over to Clodagh.
Yeah, sure.
Wrap things up for us.
Thanks a million, guys. Thanks, Fabrizio. Thanks, Stephanie. That was fantastic. And I know that I got loads of tips myself, and especially the template that you had there, Stephanie, as well, for the blank journey map. I will definitely be using that again. Could I ask a big favor of everyone? Everyone has their cameras off except for us. I want to take a picture of the group. Would you turn on your cameras for 2 seconds and give us a wave so I can take a photo? That's a no, is it? No.
Shy people.
It's just us poor guys. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Thank you so much. Give us a wave. Great stuff. Thanks so much, especially to our speakers, and thanks for all the questions as well. I will share the video if anyone wants it, and I'll forward it on to yourself, Stephanie, and Fabrizio as well, just in case you want to put it on your LinkedIn. Great stuff. That's all from us.
Would you like to tell us about the next, what's next up for UX design and SaaS?
Oh, actually, the next time we have one of the ladies that's going to be presenting. Maybe she's gone now, but Tash is here, Tash Coleman, and she is head of design at ShipIt. Am I right?
Yes,
Tash?
last time I checked.
So you're going to be presenting next month, and we do have
Mike's
some notes. I'm going to have to check that. That's it, Mike's Hanley.
And when is this beautiful date?
That is
okay,
also
I'll
a
answer
good
that.
question.
It's the 28th of July. So look out for announcements of that on LinkedIn and everywhere else that you find out about us.
Great stuff, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Till next time.
Bye.
See you.